Hello again. I'm Tripp Rogers. He is the Hall of Famer Mike Shag. This is the Fantasy Sultans, Week 17 of the NFL season. And for many leagues, it is the championship week. This is what you play for. But before we do, last week, Mike, we had our Festivus celebration.
Yes.
And we know where Festivus came from. Seinfeld. I want to share a Christmas gift from my fiance, which
Very
will
nice.
go on my desk. That's my new name tag on my desk.
Very nice. I like it. That's one of our fantasy team names, the Yada Yadas, too, by the way, in one of our leagues.
That's right.
Sultans.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, the fantasy Yada Yadas. That's it. Well, this weekend I was in two semifinals. Won one, lost one. So I'm playing for a championship in the one league, actually in the league we're both in. The funny part of it is, and I think this is what we'll talk about. You know, we talk about you got to build your roster. You know, you've got to be smart during the season, but you know, some of it just falls on luck. And here's the thing: in both leagues, I had Breece Hall, who had been a major disappointment for the Jets this year. In one league, I played him. He got 37 points. I won by 10. Other league, he was on my bench, scored 40 points. I lost by 10. Needless to say, he was in the lineup. I would have won. Of course, if he wasn't in the other lineup, I would have lost. That is kind of the way it goes in fantasy. You got to be lucky at things. And again, you know, the luck also comes in what you think and how you play this game. And listen, I'm sure there are a lot of people right now. I don't know of many, but there's got to be some who are scratching their heads wondering, what am I going to do in this championship game? You've got major injuries. You've got a major benching, although he's been a good player this year. I don't know of a lot of fantasy teams that really relied cooking with Russ, the old saying shall go. But again, we talk about injuries. We talk about players to get. That's what we're going to do here. Mike, first off, an overview on Christmas weekend, week 16 in the NFL. And again, you had some fantasy nightmares.
Well, I just want to point out with our list of grievances last week, I think some of those players we were talking about heard our podcast because they showed up in a big way. And I want to talk about Najee Harris, 78 yards and a touchdown in that dominating performance over Cincinnati last week, showing up in a big way. Justin Jefferson, 6 receptions, 141 yards and a touchdown. Kyle Pitts, 4 catches, 49 and a touchdown. So, you know, these players, they come in dribs and drabs, but, you know, I mentioned it last week. You want the players to perform. This is the time that they need to perform. I said season as a whole with those grievances because they didn't perform all season. Justin Jefferson with the injury comes back and a little rusty there, but then performs last week. But now is the time you need those players to step up in a big way. And certainly those players did. So if you had them, you were probably pretty happy. And another reason why you're advancing to a championship game.
And again, you also have to look at, again, the luck factor in there.
Yeah.
A lot of people rode CJ Stroud through the season. My daughter's one of them. I was riding him, but I've had to go to a backup quarterback. And lo and behold, in the league that I am in, the championship game, my quarterback is Baker Mayfield. Now, listen, we had said lay off of Baker Mayfield. In fact, beginning of the season, we said lay off Baker Mayfield because we did not trust him in Tampa Bay. And yet he has done really well. Tampa Bay doing really well. They control their own destiny right now. They are going to the playoffs. They would host the playoff game as the fourth divisional champion. Of course, it is the NFC South, and they do have a losing record. I just want to mention that real quick. But he's had a resurgence, and you know, Mike Evans has had a resurgence. It's interesting. The one consistent factor in that Bucs offense, since we're talking about them, Rachaad White, the running back, another guy who, you know, we jumped on early And I got him early as a backup because he said, "Oh, he's got some value," and he has proven it. He's been one of the good fantasy running backs this year. I'm not going to say elite because one season does not a career
Right.
make, but he was good in that offense, and I think it justifies the fact that they did let Leonard Fournette go after last year because they thought that this guy was going to take the reins off of him when they drafted him. And I think it has worked out. And Leonard Fournette, where are you now? I mean, he was signed to somebody's practice squad, and I don't think he ever made the field.
No.
Yeah, I
No.
didn't think so. I didn't think so. So again, with fantasy football, we are going to try and help you. Although if you're in the championship game, I don't know if you really need our help. We'll advise you, but I don't know if you're going to need our help. I'm just saying that you're in a
Yeah.
championship game. You got to be doing something right. You got to.
Yeah,
We're
because you were
not.
listening to the Sultans all season long.
Yeah. All right. I'll start with import exports this week. I've got
All right.
all imports for you. And first of all, this is a name that has popped in and out of our discussions throughout the year, but it becomes a little more so. Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Now, I know we have talked about him, and I know we kind of gave up on him halfway
Yeah.
through the year, but it's changed as Jerick McKinnon goes on IR and Isaiah Pacheco with a concussion week 16. So he's the one who could be the guy. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire has not really done all that much, but remember, he's going to be the guy who Kansas City is going to look to this week. And you talk about an offense that is in disarray. That Christmas Day game, I mean, I think a lot of people came away and just scratching their heads. But again, the list of grievances we had last week, we had the Chiefs wide receivers room. They are awful. They are awful. And they, aside of Rashee Rice, they've really done nothing to bail him out. And Travis Kelce, of course, is Travis Kelce. But, that game Monday, if you had the Raiders defense, oh, you did really well this week. You really did. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, though, is somebody who I would grab, and he is available in about 85% of the leagues. So he would be somebody you'd want to get to the waiver wire now and grab him because he could be the difference between a championship and losing by a couple of points. Another running back to look at is Zamir White. Now, he plays for the Raiders. Now, he's the guy again this week because, again, of the injuries that they've had. Josh Jacobs last week, and he's got a great matchup against a Colts defense that is giving up over 130 yards and a touchdown to running backs per game in their last four. Again, this is another guy who's available in about 85% of leagues, so I would jump on him. And I know, Mike, you've had him on import exports earlier this season. Another guy you mentioned. What am I following you? Are you writing all my material? You're the Hall of Famer. I'm not.
You're following me on Twitter. That's right.
You're the Hall of Famer. Hall of Famer Mikey. KJ Osborne for Minnesota. And again, one of the reasons is, it's addition by subtraction. TJ Hawkinson is now out for the Vikings, and somebody has got to take his throws and you talk about Justin Jefferson coming back. Yes, he's coming back, but he has been injured. And so, KJ Osborne is a guy, matchup specific. He's going to crush this week in the middle of the field against a very bad Packers defense. And again, with Hawkinson out, this is the guy who will pick up some targets. Looking for a tight end to replace TJ. Here's another one for you. Tyler Conklin's got a Thursday night matchup. Jets against the Browns. I'm sure that'll be another one Al is really going to love. But he's had 6+ targets in 4 straight games. He's got a good matchup this week against the Browns, who are giving up almost a touchdown and 60 yards to tight ends. Trevor Siemian is the quarterback this week for the Jets. I like him better than Zach Wilson simply because of the fact Zach Wilson's confidence is shot. Tyler Conklin for the Jets, you're going to get him. You've got to get him before Thursday night because he plays on Thursday night. Another tight end. We've talked about him on and off. I think I had him on the Import Exports a couple weeks ago. You've mentioned him. We're going to go back to Logan Thomas. Why? Jacoby Brissett is the starting quarterback, and Thomas had a big game week 16. 5 catches, 36 yards, and a touchdown. Had 6 targets. But keep in mind, Brissett is the starting Brissett is the starting quarterback, and the 49ers are giving up. It's a tough matchup. The 49ers are giving up almost the third most points per game to tight ends in the last 4. Again, it's a statistical matchup you'll want to exploit. And while we're talking about Washington, what about quarterback Jacoby Brissett? I mean, why not? I'll take my chances with him. Granted, it's not a big matchup, and the 49ers are a good team, no doubt. But he's a little bit better than Sam Howell, and there's a reason why Sam Howell is not going to start. And listen, you need a quarterback. What the hell? The other guy I'm going to go to as a what the hell if you need a quarterback, Jarrett Stidham. It'd be nice if he had Cortland Sutton, but that's not going to happen. But still, he's got Sean Payton as his coach and his offensive coordinator. And you know something? Got to like the matchup this week, so he could be somebody you throw in there. And one last thing, the difference between a championship and second place, difference between moving on and not moving on can be as little as a point. And the difference could be a kicker. And if you're looking for a kicker, how about Nick Folk of Tennessee? Now, you may say to yourself, why? Well, the Titans offense, they have not been scoring a lot, but they might generate enough offense to give Folk numerous field goal opportunities against the Texans. So Folk may be a guy, and again, he's a guy that you've heard on this program before. You've heard us mention him, but now is the time. If you need a kicker, here's the guy you grab, Nick Folk from Tennessee. Mike, who you got for import exports?
Well, I'm going to go with a trio of wide receivers you'll want to grab. First, we start with some Chark talk, as in DJ Chark in Carolina. And for the Panthers, well, we know one name that shows up every week. That's Adam Thielen, and rightfully so. He's closing in on 1,000 yards, but Chark was called upon last week, and he had a good game. 6 big catches from Bryce Young, 98 yards and 2 touchdowns. Hasn't been very impactful for Carolina, but you know what? Last week, you could say, well, maybe that was a fluke. I don't think so, because he's got a favorable matchup this week against Jacksonville, where the Jaguars are number 9 in the most fantasy points allowed to opposing receivers. Take a chance on him as your number 3 wide receiver in all leagues. Let's go to Miami and Cedric Wilson. He secured 3 of 5 targets for 43 yards last week. Jalen Waddle, he exited the game with a shin injury. Now, those 43 yards was about 6th of his total yards all season. So, he showed up in a big way. And in deeper leagues, if Waddle is a no-go, you may want to grab this guy. Ravens gave up big plays to Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel in week 16. They can give up big plays to Wilson Jr. as well. Finally, Marvin Mims Jr. of Denver. Broncos spread the ball around a lot last week to different receivers. In fact, he was targeted 4 times and led the team with 63 yards. That was about 1/6 of his total yardage for the season as well. With Cortland Sutton in the concussion protocol, look for teammate Brandon Johnson and Marvin Mims Jr. to see plenty of action. Of course, you mentioned it. They are no longer cooking with Russ in Denver. They're going to move on to Jarrett Stidham, see what he can do for the remainder of the season, give a little spark to that offense. So I think they should be airing the ball out, and Marvin Mims Jr. would be a great pickup. All right, you should monitor as we head into the weekend and later this week the status of Mason Rudolph in Pittsburgh. Of course, Kenny Pickett, he's been dealing with an ankle injury, and we told you on the Sultans a couple of weeks ago when he had that injury that it would be championship weekend at best that he would return to the lineup. Well, there's still a possibility he could, but if he doesn't, Mason Rudolph is the guy. And I don't know why we didn't see this coming last week, Tripp. Mason Rudolph on Christmas weekend always does well on his big night. So,
Playing
why
reindeer
didn't we
games.
see what? Yeah, reindeer games. Why didn't we see this coming and want to import Mason Rudolph last week? But of course, we saw it now, and if he plays this week, he would be a guy that you would want to grab. If you need to stream a defense, well, I've got a few for you. First of all, let's start with Denver's defense. They draw a game with the LA Chargers, get Easton Stick, who's 0-3 as a starter. Denver may have fumbled away their chances for a playoff spot, but they're still mathematically alive and have something to play for. That's why Denver is, of course, going to be switching over quarterbacks, maybe seeing a little bit more spark in that offense. Like I mentioned, they held the Chargers in their last meeting to only 7 points, and that was on the road. Now they have a chance to do it again at home. All right, what about the Houston Texans? They faced Tennessee, and last week Ryan Tannehill made his start since week 6. The Titans O-line have allowed an average of 3.7 sacks per game. That's tied with Carolina. Houston is fighting for a playoff spot as well. They match up well against this Tennessee team. Maybe you want the LA Rams defense. They play the Giants this week, and with the Giants benching Tommy DeVito in favor of Tyrod Taylor, this is a situation where we don't know which quarterback will play this week. I mean, I would, if I was, Brian Daboll, I would be wanting to roll with a hot hand in Tyrod Taylor. He looked really good in the second half of that game last week, where DeVito struggled in the first half, and then, of course, the benching came. But, of course, if Tommy DeVito does play at any point in this game, well, the LA defense could be feasting on him. Look for a couple of turnovers there. So, again, I would say put the Denver's defense at the top, then rank it Houston and LA. All right, now let's move on to the exports. And, Tripp, everybody classifies dead weight as different situations. Very unique in week 17. First of all, who to cut makes a difference on your roster. You might need to add a few extra players, and in that case, you're going to need to drop a few extra players, of course, to balance it out. But, since it's championship weekend, you can confidently drop these players, okay? They may not be so-called big drops, but you can drop them because you know that your opponent's not going to be able to pick them up because in most cases, they're not available until the following week. And this is championship weekend. The season is over after this week. So drop these players. I'm going to tell you, Alexander Madison in Minnesota is a player that you could drop. Last week, he was back, but only ran the ball 2 times for -1 yard. Ty Chandler is out touching him and in 8 touches to 2 touches. So I would definitely not see a big factor for Alexander Madison. And of course, Elijah Moore. Last week, Browns passed for over 364 yards, but Elijah Moore wasn't a part of that passing game. Why? Because Amari Cooper is the guy, and that's the guy Joe Flacco turns to. They're going to need to continue to roll with that offense. I look for big play passing performances from Flacco. And I'll tell you what, Elijah Moore, he's a check down receiver. And that offense is not going to be looking to check the ball down very much this week. So that's my import exports. Now, I want to tell you, as we head into championship weekend, some tips. We the Sultans are going to toss out some of our tips. And first of all, I want to say, don't be afraid to roll with a hot hand. The players that got you here are the players you want to start. You got to look at the players that have been trending in the right direction the past few weeks on your roster, and you want to start them as well. You roll with the guys that brought you there, but you don't want to forget about your bread and butter. Those are your stud players, because there's a tendency with fantasy owners to come in and, they say, well, I'm going to start this guy because he's the hot hand or the flavor of the week. And then it turns out you end up, passing on your stud player, and your stud player does better. So I definitely think that you want to, consider that as big factors there and roll with the players that got you here at this point. You mentioned it, Tripp, earlier. You don't need much of our advice because, you're doing something right. This is why you got to the championship game. So, that's what I'm going to say. Roll with a hot hand and keep your studs, because those are the players that got you there.
And I want to touch on something that you mentioned real quick. again, we do very little. We prep ourselves, but we don't sit there and we don't know what each other's going to say. And you made a good point about dropping a couple of players like Alexander Madison and also Elijah Moore. The other side of it is that the best offense is a good defense. So if you drop these players, again, as you said, Mike, will not be available on waivers till next week. And it doesn't matter next week because after championship week, you're not going to need them. So
Right.
you could drop them, but also pick up some hot guys that we've mentioned for pickups. Because again, the numbers we're seeing on these players, 85% availability, that means you could grab them. If anything, you prevent the other owners from getting it or the other owner from getting it and costing him a championship. Because again, we've also seen some funny things happen. Players show up on the injury report on Saturday before a Sunday game, or Friday before a Sunday game. I should say Saturday before a Monday game, because there's no practice the day before the game. The point I make, though, is your defense could be grabbing this guy ahead of time. You may not want to start him, but you stash him on your roster, and there you are. And it also goes back to, and again, if you're in the championship game, you've probably done this, but one of the reasons I think I'm in the championship game in the one league I'm in is because I grabbed Jonathan Taylor. When he went on IR, I put him on IR. Grabbed another player to sub in. And then when Taylor came back, I was able to put him back on the roster. That's how you use the IR. Keep an eye on players who go out. If they're listed as out for this game, you can throw them on the IR. And at this point, again, if you've got a player on your team, you're playing in a championship game, and you got a player who's out, throw him on the IR or cut him. Doesn't matter because it's the end of the season, and grab somebody. The only reason you would keep somebody who you're not going to play is if you're in a keeper league. That's a whole different ballgame. We're talking about redraft year after year leagues. This is the last week. I mean, this is a championship. This could be the difference between winning and losing. We try and help you along. We are the Fantasy Sultans. We're here, and we're free. The best things in life are free. The Fantasy Sultans are free. That is week 17 for you. Now, we'd love to hear your comments and questions. You can email us, fantasysultans@gmail.com. Also, don't forget about my other podcast, Tripp's Take. You find it the same places you find the Fantasy Sultans, on Spotify for podcasters and YouTube. All you have to do is search Tripp's Take, just as you search Fantasy Sultans. Like the music of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, listen to WTRSradio.com online. Listen, we will be back. This is not the end for the Fantasy Sultans. We'll be back, of course, to wrap up the fantasy season. We'll give you our projections for the playoffs, and we'll have all that stuff come. Are we going to do it this week? Again, see how much we talk about?
We're going to do it next week. Yeah, we're going to do the wrap up.
I thought so, because we would wrap up. We'd wrap up, and we'll give you our predictions for the season. We'll do that next week. I thought. See, rehearse. Lots of rehearsal. Lots of talking back and forth. Like I said, yada yada yada. That's what it's all about here.
Hold that sign up once again. Hold that one more time on the sign. Hey, you yadded over the best part. No, I mentioned the fantasy.
He's the Hall of Famer Mike Scheck. I am Tripp Rogers. We are the Fantasy Sultans.
And you are not.